The car wasn't an accident. It was an assassination attempt. Emma was halfway home, barefoot in the rain, carrying the remains of the report Nick had thrown away, when headlights exploded through the darkness. A stranger tackled her out of the road seconds before the car hit. Then he spoke into his phone and said the words that changed everything. This wasn't an accident. The man who had just broken her pride had also assigned 4 guards to keep her alive. Picture this. It is late. The kind of late where the city just holds its breath. Emma stands totally frozen on the cold marble floor of Carver International, her fingers gripping the financial reports she has practically bled over for 3 agonizing weeks. And Nicholas Carver? He does not even blink. He stares out his penthouse window at the relentless rain and casually tells her to pack her things and walk home. She begs for just one more look, but his voice is absolute ice. The sheer weight of that disrespect isn't enough to shatter anyone's spirit. But you and I have probably both made this mistake, holding on to something that was meant to break. Sometimes, the people who force you out into the freezing dark are actually doing you the biggest favor of your life. It is 11 at night, and the sky is tearing itself apart with a brutal downpour. Emma is stranded. She took the subway just to meet his insane deadline, and now she is standing there, explaining that the trains are dead and she is in heels. Does Nick care? The man is completely void of empathy. He just coldly blames her for not planning ahead and calls her flawless data absolute garbage. But let us be real here. Emma survived on black coffee for 2 weeks, checking every single digit 3 times until her eyes burned. Her work was absolute perfection. But there is a heavy truth we all have to learn eventually. When you are holding on to the actual truth, the people who are terrified of it will always try to make you feel like you are the crazy one. She found his secret. Emma had not just found an error. She had stumbled right into the belly of the beast. Hidden in those spreadsheets was ironclad proof that someone was skimming heavy cash from his shadow companies, with those quiet men in tailored suits slipping through the lobby. At 3 a.m, she knew her boss was tied to the underworld. She is not blind, but she is desperate. Her mother is lying in a hospital bed miles away, and the medical bills are a crushing weight on her chest. This job paid triple what she could get anywhere else. But here is a lesson that costs too much to learn. No amount of money is worth your peace of mind. Ignoring the sirens just because the paycheck is heavy is a dangerous trap that will eventually swallow you whole. She whispers a quiet plea, her voice trembling as she mentions the 40-minute walk and the lack of an umbrella. But Nick's patience snaps like a dry branch. He threatens to have her dragged out by force if she lingers another second. He turns to her, and the dead, vacant look in his eyes sends a primal chill straight down her spine. 2 massive security guards are already blocking the exit, arms crossed, waiting for the signal. Her cheeks burn with total humiliation. Everything inside her wants to hurl those heavy reports right at his chest, to scream that she is being punished for being too honest. But she bites her tongue and walks away. True strength is not always about fighting back right away. Sometimes, it is simply knowing when to walk away and survive another day. Her heels click against the slick marble lobby, echoing like a slow, painful countdown to her ruined career. Riding that silent elevator down from the 40th floor feels like descending straight into an empty grave. She catches her reflection in the polished metal doors. 27 years old, her hair coming undone, her mascara completely failing against the tears she is fighting back. But she refuses to break. She will not let a man like Nick have her tears. The night guard pretends she does not exist as she pushes through the revolving doors and straight into the brutal storm. The freezing rain immediately soaks right through her thin blazer. But you have to remember something about the storm. The heaviest rain is exactly what washes away the toxic things you no longer need. Within seconds, she is completely drenched. Dark streaks of makeup run down her cheeks, a quiet painting of her exhaustion. And that heavy folder she is clutching to her chest. The ink is bleeding out in dark blue rivers, washing away the only solid proof she had left. But she takes a deep breath and forces her legs to move. She tells herself she can survive a 40-minute trek. She begins pushing through the flooded, abandoned streets. Thunder shakes the concrete beneath her, vibrating right into her bones as the cold bites at her skin. She truly believes this is her absolute rock bottom. But life has a strange rhythm. Whenever you feel like you are buried under the absolute worst the world can offer, it is usually just the universe setting the stage for your comeback. We are about to uncover what really went down in the dark, but first, take a second to pause and reflect with us. Tell me where you are listening from tonight, because we are all fighting these storms together. Now, look back at Emma. She is moving like an absolute ghost through the unforgiving Chicago rain. Her soaked heels feel like anchors, dragging her down with every step. But the heavy weight of humiliation is what truly exhausts her. The wind howls violently between the towering skyscrapers, throwing icy rain directly into her eyes until her face goes numb. She is running entirely on fumes. But that is what true grit looks like. Never let a brutal night stop your forward motion. The breakthrough you are praying for is usually waiting just beyond the point of surrender. Her mind drifts to her mother, resting in that quiet little nursing facility up in Michigan. Her mom is the only soul left who truly believes in her. And now, Emma just lost the single lifeline keeping them both afloat. All those quiet sacrifices, selling her old car, living in a dark, tiny apartment, skipping meals. It all feels like a cruel joke. She played entirely by the rules, worked herself to the bone, and got destroyed for doing her job perfectly. A bitter, broken laugh escapes her lips. A sudden, violent gust of wind slams into her chest, forcing her to grab onto a rusted street lamp just to keep from collapsing. It is a harsh but necessary reminder. When the world tries to blow you away, true love and family are the only anchors that hold you grounded. Those expensive heels she saved up for are completely ruined. One is bent sideways, and her freezing feet are starting to bleed. So she makes a choice. She strips the shoes off and grips them tightly in her hands. She walks barefoot through the icy puddles and scattered street trash, reclaiming some small piece of control over her fate. That waterlogged folder of evidence? It is practically mush now. With a surge of raw anger, she marches to a corner trash can and aggressively shoves it inside. 3 agonizing weeks, 21 sleepless nights, gone. She did not just lose a job tonight. She lost her belief in a fair system. But sometimes you have to empty your hands. You have to drop the broken pieces of your past, so you are ready to pick up whatever comes to save you next. Stripped of her dignity, Emma tilts her head back and stares up at the suffocating black sky, letting the cold rain wash over her face. For a fleeting second, she genuinely wonders if it would be easier to just fade into the background. Nobody would even notice. Definitely not the boss who erased her entire existence without a second thought. But Emma is built from something much harder than that. She clenches her frozen jaw, tightens her grip on those ruined shoes, and keeps walking. She tells herself it is just a few more blocks to her empty apartment. She is completely blind to the fact that her entire destiny is about to drastically pivot. It is a beautiful lesson, really. Your biggest, life-altering moments always strike exactly when you think your story is already over. She takes a sharp turn down a desolate, narrow alleyway. The broken streetlights flicker weakly, casting long, wavering shadows that make her look like a lonely ghost drifting over the wet pavement. The storm is intensifying, violently rattling the metal shop signs with a sound straight out of a nightmare. She wraps her arms tightly around herself, her bare feet so numb they feel like they are stepping on crushed glass. This icy city feels completely devoid of mercy tonight. She gazes down the empty road, hearing nothing but the relentless rain and the frantic beating of her own heart. A random car cruises past, its headlights slicing through the dark. Even in your most exhausted moments, you have to stay awake. Danger loves to creep into the blind spots you forget to watch. Emma pays no attention to the hum of that passing engine. She is completely hollowed out, wanting nothing more than to lock her door and disappear from the world. But, as she steps off the curb into an empty intersection, pure chaos erupts. Blinding white headlights explode out of the darkness to her left. Tires scream violently against the slick asphalt, and a massive black sedan is hurtling straight toward her. Emma snaps her head around, her eyes wide with sheer terror, but her frozen legs refuse to obey. She tries to scramble back, but the wet road betrays her, sending her crashing hard onto her side. In that agonizing split second, she braces for the absolute end. But suddenly, a powerful hand grips her arm. Salvation often arrives right when destruction feels certain. Look, you and I both know what it means to hit rock bottom, but picture this. The freezing rain is coming down in sheets when Emma is violently launched off the pavement. She hits the wet concrete hard, right next to the stranger who just shoved her out of the way. A rogue car plows into a parked truck, crushing metal, shattering glass, and setting off car alarms that scream into the night. She lies there, gasping, her ears ringing with pure chaos. The man who just saved her leans in close, his voice low and guarded, warning her not to move. Blinking through the rain, she tries to make sense of his face. It is a harsh truth we all face eventually. You never really know who will pull you from the fire. When your entire world suddenly collapses in the dark, the stranger is in his 30s, a rugged shadow of a man with a sharp jawline and a jagged scar etched right over his eyebrow. But the shock hits Emma harder than the pavement. He is not just some random hero. She recognizes him. He is one of the elite shadow enforcers from Carver International. Before she can even choke out that she is all right, he is already barking commands into his radio. He reports the hit and run, confirming he has her safe. Then comes the truth that makes her blood run cold. The driver bailed, he says, and this was no accident. The realization hits her like a blade of ice. She was the target. It just goes to show, grabbed his shirt. Sometimes the quietest people fading into the background are the exact ones keeping you breathing. The enforcer does not miss a beat. His eyes track the black luxury sedan tearing away through the slick, rain-washed streets, quickly calling out its tinted windows license plate. Hanging up, he looks down at her with a heavy, dead-serious concern, asking if she has the strength to stand. Panic surges through Emma. She demands to know if he has been following her. Without a hint of hesitation, David reveals he is acting on direct orders from Nicholas Carver himself. He reaches out a scarred hand, telling her they have to vanish right now because that car was meant to end her life. It is a terrifying realization. When you start digging up buried secrets and doing what is right, you will make dangerous enemies. But the right allies will always stand by your side. Emma can barely process the madness unfolding around her. Someone just tried to end her life on a freezing street, only for her to be saved at the final second by a phantom bodyguard. And the most agonizing twist of all, this protector was sent by Nicholas Carver, the same ruthless man who tore her down and fired her from his office barely an hour ago. David gently pulls her up from the icy pavement, gripping her arm tight, as if he knows her legs might give out at any second. Her mind is a total blur, trapped in a paralyzing wave of shock and confusion. Life has a funny way of teaching us its hardest lessons. Things are rarely what they appear to be on the surface, and sometimes the person you think is your worst enemy is actually your truest shield. Just imagine the raw agony she is in right now. Her knees are bruised and bleeding, and her whole body shakes violently from the freezing storm and the lingering terror. Without a word, David sheds his heavy jacket and wraps it tightly around her trembling shoulders. He guides her quickly down a forgotten, pitch-black alleyway where a battered gray sedan sits idling in the shadows. It is not some Glosser or Kerfoot ride. It is a complete ghost car. He ushers her into the passenger seat and slides behind the wheel, refusing to even switch on the headlights. They slip silently into the bleeding city traffic. It is a hard truth about survival. Sometimes you have to strip away all the pride and comfort and simply fade into the shadows to live another day. As the heater finally breathes some warmth into the freezing cabin, Emma just sits there, trembling, trying to untangle the nightmare. She whispers out into the dark, asking if he is absolutely certain the crash was intentional and why they are hiding in a broken-down ghost car. David does not even blink. His eyes stay locked on the rearview mirror, hunting for any sign of a tail. His voice is steady. He confirms it was a planned hit, explaining that this burner car keeps them off the grid, letting the enemy think she was taken by an ambulance. Emma realizes it has to be the explosive financial report she uncovered. It leaves us with a heavy lesson. Speaking the truth demands immense courage, because exposing the dark will always paint a target on your back. The scattered pieces of this nightmare are finally snapping into place. David meets her eyes in the mirror, his gaze sharp and calculating. He explains that finding those missing funds made her an immediate threat to a traitor hidden deep within their own ranks. The bosses know a mole is bleeding them dry. They just do not know the face. Drained and hollow, she leans her head against the cold glass and asks the hardest question. If Carver knew she was a target, why did he publicly destroy her career? David shakes his head. It was never a game. It was a desperate diversion to make the real enemy drop their guard. It just proves that in our chaotic world, the deepest acts of protection can often look like the cruelest forms of abandonment on the surface. You and I know what it means to hide true feelings, but watch what happens here. David reveals Carver never intended to leave her, walking alone in the dark. Emma stares at him, chest tight, realizing this man had been shadowing her the moment she left the building. David confesses there were 3 other guards mapping her route home. She was wrapped in an invisible layer of protection the whole time, but then his voice drops. The enemy moved faster than anyone anticipated, proving just how close she was to exposing the mastermind. It is a beautiful, painful lesson about trust. Even when you feel entirely abandoned in the cold rain, there might be unseen hands working tirelessly to keep you safe from harm. Emma feels the air thinning in her lungs, suddenly terrified by the suffocating weight of the danger surrounding her. When she finally asks where they are disappearing to, David casually mentions they are driving straight to the boss's private estate hidden outside the city. A literal fortress, crawling with elite guards and private doctors. Exhausted to her core, she practically begs to just go back to the quiet of her own apartment. David shuts it down with cold, undeniable logic. He tells her that her home is the very first trap a hitman would set. Emma freezes, knowing he is absolutely right. It is a sobering thought. In moments of profound crisis, the place where we feel the most comfortable is often the most dangerous place we can possibly be. The beaten-up sedan rolls down an isolated, dead quiet road on the edge of the city, stopping as a massive iron gate slowly parts in the mist. It is like something out of a midnight dream. A sprawling, fog-drenched estate rises up like a fortress, holding back the storm, with warm golden light spilling from the heavy glass windows. It feels miles away from the brutal violence they just left behind. David kills the engine and steps out to open her door, quietly telling her this is the only true safe haven left. As Emma steps onto the driveway, her legs trembling from adrenaline and cold, she realizes she is crossing into a hidden world. This proves that reaching the absolute breaking point is often the only way to discover a totally new kind of inner strength. Before David can even raise his hand to the heavy wood, the grand doors swing open, washing Emma in a blinding wave of golden heat. The sudden warmth cuts straight through the biting storm, but what truly takes her breath away is the man standing in the center of the vast hall. Nicholas Carver. Yet, the icy, untouchable executive is entirely gone. He stands there in a soaked white shirt, his dark hair dripping wet, as if he had been tearing through the storm himself. His eyes carry an agonizing, burning intensity we have never witnessed before. He closes the distance between them in rapid, heavy strides. It goes to show that, beneath the most perfectly polished armor, people often carry a deeply fragile heart that cares far more than words could ever explain. Stick with me here, because this is the moment everything shifts. Emma stands absolutely paralyzed, drenched in rain and completely overwhelmed by the chaos of the night. Carver stops inches away from her. He scans her bruised, bleeding knees and her wide, haunted eyes with a desperate intensity. When he finally asks if she is hurt, his voice is fractured, rough, and entirely breathless. Hearing this untouchable man sound so completely terrified for her shakes her to her core. She barely manages to whisper that she is okay. Carver hesitates for a fleeting second before letting his hand rest gently on her freezing shoulder. It teaches us something profound about vulnerability. The strongest people are often the ones most terrified of losing the delicate things they cherish. The housekeeper bursts into the room, her hands full of thick towels and a heavy robe. Carver shifts into his commanding element, barking harsh orders to get Emma settled by the fire, demanding blankets and dialing his private doctor. But then the armor fractures. He turns slowly, meeting Emma with a gaze that holds terrifying regret, and he actually apologizes. Emma just stares at him, her chest heaving. A bitter, jagged laugh tears out of her throat. She is trembling, partly from the freezing rain, but mostly from unadulterated rage. He admits he took a massive gamble that broke her pride, claiming it was the only way. It is a heavy truth we all face eventually. Even the most desperate intentions can leave bleeding scars, and real forgiveness is something a man has to bleed for, never just expect. You and I have to look closely here, because the illusion completely shatters. Nick stands there, his jaw locked tight enough to grind stone, refusing to look away. He tells her the brutal truth. He had to make the shadows believe she was completely broken and abandoned, just to draw the wolves out into the light. Emma is not buying a single word. Her fingernails bite so deeply into her palms, she is a heartbeat away from drawing blood. She whispers that he wanted her to feel hollowed out, and he succeeded. Nick steps dangerously close, his voice dropping to a desperate gravel, swearing he only crushed her spirit to keep her breathing. It is a terrifying paradox we sometimes learn the hard way. The very hands that drag you from the edge of the cliff are often the ones that leave the deepest bruises on your skin. For the first time in his life, the untouchable king of the empire is crumbling. That permanent mask of frost is slipping, replaced by a raw, suffocating panic. Watching him look genuinely terrified sends a colder chill down her spine than the near-fatal crash ever could. Her voice trembles into the quiet room. She asks him why her life even matters, convinced she is nothing but a disposable name on a payroll ledger. Nick squeezes his eyes shut, waging a silent war against his own chest. When he finally speaks, his voice is a broken, desperate ruin. He tells her she is so much more than just a passing face in his world. But the confession is too heavy. He builds his walls back up, calling Marina to escort her away. It teaches us a quiet truth. Real emotion always bleeds through the armor when the stakes are life and death. No matter how desperately a person tries to bury it. Emma walks behind the older woman in absolute silence, her mind spiraling from the emotional whiplash. The cavernous halls of the mansion stretch out before her, holding secrets she cannot begin to guess. Yet one truth rings agonizingly clear. Nicholas is a labyrinth of a man, and that wild, desperate fire in his eyes is a danger she is not prepared to face. Hours later, she sits numbly in a grand room lined with dark mahogany, a heavy wool blanket draped over her trembling shoulders. A cup of tea turns cold on the side table, completely forgotten. The private doctor came and went, wrapping her bruised legs and leaving medication behind, but the real agony is untouchable by medicine. It reminds us of a bitter reality. The physical scrapes fade away in time, but the quiet trauma of being used as a pawn will echo in a person's mind for years. Marina fades out the door, leaving Emma stranded in a suffocating quiet. Outside the heavy glass, the rain falls in endless sheets, a perfect mirror to the storm wrecking her mind. I want you and I to trace this back to where it all began. She stares into the dancing flames. Returning to that fateful moment, she spotted the discrepancy. It started as a phantom number, just a few $1,000s, hidden behind a cryptic ledger entry. But when she followed the thread, a horrifying picture emerged. Tiny fractions in the accounts, small enough to bypass the corporate alarms, bleeding out a mountain of wealth. Thinking she was doing the right thing, she handed the explosive report directly to him. The lesson is terrifying, but essential. Uncovering the truth can sometimes make you a savior. But more often, it simply paints a glowing target on your back. The realization hits her like a physical blow. That financial report is the exact reason she was thrown out and hunted by a moving vehicle. The pieces click together in the dark. She was never the brilliant pioneer who found the missing money, and Nicholas was never a blind fool. He knew. He was already deep in the shadows hunting his own demons when she accidentally stumbled into his war zone. The brass handle clicks, and Nick steps back into the room. Changed out of his ruined suit, he still carries the suffocating gravity of an executioner. He sinks into the leather chair opposite her, his gaze dangerously calm. In a low, scraping murmur, he asks if she has finally put the puzzle together. Emma turns to ice. It is a sobering reminder. Never assume you hold the whole picture, because someone else is always playing a much darker game. She watches him for a long, heavy minute, the silence stretching tight before she finally offers a shallow nod. Her voice is barely a whisper when she admits that those phantom transfers were no accident. It was a calculated, bloodless robbery. Nick leans back into the shadows of the chair, his profile glowing against the firelight. He confesses that he has been hunting these ghosts in his company for over 3 agonizing months. The architect of the theft is a phantom, moving millions through an intricate web of offshore shells, keeping every single theft just beneath the threshold of detection. Emma leans forward, completely pulled into his dark gravity. It reveals a powerful law of survival. True patience is a deadly weapon. Sometimes you must sit quietly and let a thief believe they have won, only to follow their bloody footprints back to the source. Emma demands to know if he has a name for the phantom pulling the strings. Nick stares back, his expression completely detached. He admits the list was cut down to 3 faces, but he lacked the killing strike. He needed a pure, untainted outsider to stumble upon the fraud. Let you and I pause here, because this is where the betrayal truly sinks in. Emma gestures to herself, a sickening dread washing over her, as she realizes she was the sacrificial lamb. Nick does not flinch. He coldly confesses that he handed her the files, banking entirely on her relentless mind to trip the wire. Half of her wants to tear the room apart, but her chest just feels hollow. She condemns him for letting her wander blindfolded into a slaughterhouse. It is a harsh tragedy. Often, the very brilliance you pride yourself on is exactly what makes you the perfect pawn. He defends his cruelty, explaining that a single warning would have tainted her reaction. Her terror had to be authentic, because genuine panic from the innocent forces the guilty to make foolish moves. Emma glares at him, her eyes burning through his composure. She spits back at him, asking if a foolish move means hiring an assassin to run her down on a wet highway. Nick tightens his jaw, his knuckles turning a stark white. For a fleeting second, the pride falls away, and he admits his failure. He deeply underestimated the sheer desperation of a cornered thief. In that quiet, heavy moment, the room shifts. Emma no longer sees an invincible king. She sees an isolated man fighting a war in the dark, watching his empire rot from the inside out. Even the strongest men will gamble with innocent souls when their backs are against the wall. It hits her with terrifying clarity. She was the singular spark that detonated a massive conspiracy. Emma draws a slow, ragged breath, pulling her shattered nerves together. She leans back into the chair, locking her eyes onto his, and asks the most dangerous question of the night. What is the final move? Nick watches her, his gaze resembling a frozen, bottomless lake calm on the surface, but holding devastating currents below. He speaks in a lethal whisper, vowing to dismantle the traitor entirely, but his focus has shifted. His absolute priority now is ensuring Emma survives the night. She remains silent, but a hard, unbreakable resolve settles over her features. You and I are witnessing a quiet transformation here. You rarely choose the brutal chaos that crashes into your life. But you alone decide how you stand up and face the storm. The silence stretches until Nick outlines the cold mechanics of his strategy. Dragging her name through the mud and throwing her out was never a punishment. Her financial report was the final nail he needed. If he had celebrated her mind, the phantom would have vanished into thin air. Emma sits frozen, her stare cutting through him like shattered glass. Nick holds his ground, his voice an unbroken, steady rhythm. He explains that the enemy needed to see her publicly broken and cast aside. It was the only way to make the hunter lower his rifle. Emma closes her eyes, exhaling a breath that is far colder than the storm raging outside his window. She whispers the unforgivable truth. He turned her into breathing bait. It is a bitter pill to swallow. In the ruthless theater of power, the king will always choose absolute victory over a single bruised heart. The man actually nods, admitting to the monstrous scheme. He confesses she was the bait, but violently insists she was never left unprotected. He swears he had his best ghosts tracking her every move, keeping his top enforcer perfectly positioned in her shadow. He tells her she was never in true peril. It is the absolute worst thing he could have said. Emma fractures entirely. The grief and terror she swallowed all night violently erupts. She screams that she was mere inches from becoming roadkill beneath a black sedan. If his enforcer had hesitated for a single breath, she would be nothing but a bloody memory on the pavement. And he dares to call that safe? Nick absorbs the beating in silence, his eyes heavy with crushing guilt. It proves a haunting truth. A man can build the perfect cage, but he can never truly control the chaotic, bloody reality of the streets. Let us step into the heavy air of that room tonight. You and I, Nick stands there, crushed by the weight of his own gambles. He admits he pushed the limits, his voice haunted by the thought of her bleeding on the streets. Emma shoots up, trembling with raw rage. How can he claim to protect her when he just tossed her out like trash in front of the entire syndicate? Nick takes a cautious step forward. He swears she was never a disposable pawn. He only chose her because she was the one spark that could force the traitor into the light. He wasn't gambling with her life, only the enemy's mind. But here is a simple, meaningful lesson. When you treat loyal people like simple chess pieces, you can never be surprised when they finally flip the board on you. A broken, hollow laugh escapes Emma's lips, shattering the quiet room. She locks onto his eyes, stripping away his defenses. "You did not gamble with my life," she whispers. "But what about my pride? What about the trust I'd placed in you?" For the first time, the untouchable boss has absolutely nothing to say. He stands frozen in the heavy silence. Emma backs away, treating the air around him like poison. She confesses her saddest delusion. She truly believed that, beneath his dark reputation, he respected pure grit. She thought her endless grind would earn her a real place at his table. Instead, she was just another tool in his twisted box. Her voice drops to a razor-thin whisper, unsure which reality hurts more. It brings us to a simple life lesson. The most agonizing wounds never come from the blades of our enemies, but straight from the mentors we foolishly dared to trust. The fire is roaring, but the chill between them is absolute. Emma refuses to hold back a single ounce of her pain. She stares right through him, exposing the terrifying truth that he turned her into a walking target. Our ruthless mafia boss just stares at the floor, the heavy shadows under his eyes, revealing a man completely exhausted by his own sins. He promises to fix this with action, not empty words. But Emma cuts him down with a voice like cracked ice. She demands he remember the pure, suffocating panic he felt when she was almost killed. If he truly cares, he will never pull a stunt like that again. Then comes her final boundary, one more betrayal, and she walks forever. Listen closely to this simple life lesson. When someone shows you their true colors, believe them the first time, and never let empty apologies paint over the truth. She turns her back and walks out, leaving the feared boss completely alone by the dying fire. The heavy thud of her door echoes down that dim, sprawling hallway like a long, exhausted sigh. Nick designed this bedroom specifically for her, and the perfection of it is suffocating. Cream sheets folded with painful precision, soft amber lighting, the rich scent of crushed lavender. It is so flawless that it feels like a beautifully crafted trap. Emma is not closing her eyes tonight. She pulls a thick blanket around her shoulders, curling into a chair by the window. She just stares out into the pitch-black garden, her mind burning with betrayal. It brings us to a painful but simple life lesson. A golden cage is still a cage. No amount of silk sheets or sweet lavender can ever make up for the agonizing reality of being played. You and I need to sit with the absolute whiplash this girl is enduring. Just 36 hours ago, Emma was burning the midnight oil, desperate to prove her worth. Instead, she was thrown to the wolves just to force a rat out of hiding. But the cruelest twist? Nick always had shadows watching her. He never intended for her to die. He only needed the traitor to bite. Now, her mind is a tangled mess of grief and confusion. Should she run far away, back to the crushing weight of her empty bank accounts? But the terrifying shadow of her mother's medical bills still looms over her. Here is a simple life lesson for the dark hours. Sometimes the hardest choices are not about justice or pride. When your family's survival is all on the line, your own ego has to quietly step aside. Remember the desperate life she came from. A cramped, leaking apartment, nights spent suffocating under the terror of poverty. Nick Carver is a dangerous storm of a man, but he is also her only lifeline out of the gutter. Yet, staying in his shadowy world means navigating a labyrinth of blood and lies. Emma is a creature of logic. She trusts numbers because math never betrays you, and in the quiet dark she realizes a staggering truth. She is the only one brilliant enough to untangle the financial web that even the boss could not crack. She rattled a king. Remember this simple life lesson. Your deepest vulnerability in one world might just be your greatest weapon in another. Do not underestimate your own quiet brilliance. Sometimes, being the smartest person in the room is exactly what makes you untouchable. It is a beautiful, agonizing tragedy. Just by existing, she forced this ruthless monarch to drop his iron shield. She peered through the cracks in his armor, proving he is not just some heartless ghost. Is that why she remains frozen in this dark bedroom? Because deep down, she senses that this terrifying man is profoundly alone. Outside, the heavy rain beats down, mirroring her chaotic heart. She remembers the shattered look in Nick's eyes when she threw her pain at him. He offered no defensive poison, no arrogant excuses. He simply swallowed her fury, letting the crushing guilt take hold. The man knew his sins. Take this simple life lesson to heart. True accountability is never about building a fortress of excuses. It is about owning your devastating mistakes and taking the absolute brunt of the storm. The agonizing question hanging in the dark is whether a fractured trust can ever be rebuilt. Emma rises, walking slowly toward the glowing screen of the laptop he provided. With trembling fingers, she boots up the hidden backup files she secretly preserved. It is a masterpiece of quiet rebellion. If she runs, her story fades to dust. But if she chooses to remain in this suffocating empire, the rules must change. She refuses to play the blind pawn ever again. She will become the hand that moves the pieces. As the blue light reflects in her eyes, the tears dry up, replaced by a cold resolve. Here is a simple, meaningful life lesson. When you realize the game was rigged from the start, you do not just surrender. You study the board, flip the table, and learn to play with a beautifully ruthless precision. By the time the gray morning finally breaks, the relentless rain has faded, leaving a bruised, melancholy light in her room. Emma wakes up, tangled in those luxurious sheets, but the terror in her chest has morphed into something entirely different. She found her armor in the dark. She sits on the edge of the mattress when the heavy oak door slowly creaks open. It is Nick Carver, but the ruthless predator of the night is gone. He walks in quietly, holding a steaming cup of coffee, his eyes carrying a fragile, desperate gentleness. The bitter war between them has paused. Listen to me, because this is a simple life lesson we all need. A new dawn does not just scatter the shadows. It offers a profound, terrifying chance to completely rewrite a broken dynamic. If only you have the courage to leave the bitter ashes behind. He is dressed in a crisp, unbuttoned white shirt, his dark hair still damp. For a fragile second, the terrifying mask of the syndicate boss vanishes. He is just a man, drowning in a deep, agonizing ocean of regret. He sets the warm mug down, pulls up a chair, and simply waits in the silence, giving her all the power. Emma watches him, her guard still up. But the blistering hatred from midnight has burned down to embers. Nick takes a shaky breath, and his famously rough voice is heartbreakingly soft. He admits he spent the entire night haunted by the brutal reality that she almost died for his sins. Here is a simple life lesson. True vulnerability is the ultimate strength. When break someone's world, dropping the tough exterior, and bleeding your honest regret is the only real path to redemption. The words just die in his throat. He stares at her, and the raw, unprotected agony in his gaze makes Emma's breath hitch. Nick Carver does not know how to beg for forgiveness, but his silence speaks volumes. She wraps her trembling fingers around the hot mug, grounding herself, before asking the question that has been tearing her apart. Did he ever consider that she never wanted a role in his bloody underworld? Nick absorbs the blow. He holds her gaze and softly confesses that he has absolutely no right to ask for her mercy. But the moment she cracked those hidden ledgers, she painted a massive target on her own back. Let this be a simple life lesson. Ignorance is a protective shield. Once your eyes are opened to a dark, dangerous truth, you can never look away, and it will pull you into a devastating war you never intended to fight. Emma sits frozen as the tragic reality sets in. The untouchable armor of this dangerous man is shattering. The pieces finally click together in her mind. This was never just about a few missing millions. He is hunting a ghost inside his own house. Nick slumps back, the exhaustion radiating from his bones, and reveals a truth that stops her heart. The rat destroying his empire is Marcus Lane, the very man who stood by his side for 20 years. A staggering betrayal. Emma's voice shakes as she accuses him of using her as bait. But Nick leans in, his tone thick with desperation. He had to publicly cast her out, so the wolves would believe she was completely unprotected. Before we part tonight, hold on to this simple life lesson. Keep your walls high, because the most lethal blade never comes from a sworn enemy. It is almost always held by the person you trusted the most. The room feels heavy, suffocating under a harsh confession. Nick finally breaks the silence, admitting he never left Emma alone. He had David and 3 armed ghosts tracking her every move. Emma stares, searching his face for a lie, but all she finds is an exhausting, crushing guilt. The fight simply drains out of her. She lets out a long breath and asks what comes next. Nick moves close, sitting on the very edge of her mattress. The air between them hums with gravity. He promises she is safe, but admits he desperately needs her mind to survive this war. Here is a thought for your late night. True protection rarely feels like a warm embrace. Most of the time, it is someone moving quietly through the dark, keeping the monsters at bay, so you can finally rest. He hands over a piece of his battered soul. Nick confesses that his life taught him never to trust anyone. Yet she makes him want to shatter that rule. For a paranoid king of the underworld, that kind of vulnerability is a massive confession. He respects her because she refuses to cower. She looks the devil in the eye and demands the truth. Emma cannot help the soft smile that breaks across her face. She jokes about how he drives her to the brink of madness, only to pull her back in. Nick just raises an eyebrow, his rigid shoulders dropping in pure relief that she is staying. It reminds us of a simple truth. Courage is undeniably magnetic. If you want the respect of those who walk in shadows, you have to stand your ground and meet their gaze when the rest of the world looks away. A genuine laugh escapes her lips, completely free of its usual bitter edge. She calls him out softly, asking if this gentle treatment is his way of making up for the nightmare. Nick does not even try to hide it. He just nods. In that quiet space, the deep wounds between them start stitching themselves together. The scene shifts, finding Emma alone in a high-tech office buried deep within his fortress. The The cool blue light of the monitors washes over her face. She is totally dialed in. Every ounce of hesitation is gone, replaced by a fierce hunger for the coming war. You and I know how that feels. Sometimes the best way to heal from a massive blow is to take all that chaotic, lingering pain and channel it straight into your purpose. Turn your agony into absolute focus, and watch how quickly you take over the room. This is the exact moment the tide turns. Emma is finished playing the helpless pawn in a game she did not choose. Armed with encrypted files from Nick's private server, she transforms into a hunter. She tears through the financial reports, and the ugly truth spills out. We are talking deep rot. Off-the-books cash flows, slush funds, dressed up as investments, and ghost accounts tied to overseas shadows. It is a masterpiece of deception. But Emma catches a subtle, repeating rhythm. Massive transfers bleeding out of a Miami branch and funneling directly into a locked-down vault in Luxembourg. Here is something to remember when the chips are down. Nentels are down. Never, ever underestimate someone who has absolutely nothing left to lose. They will always see the hidden details that everyone else was simply too comfortable to notice. The account name is completely scrubbed, but humans always leave a fingerprint. Emma zeroes in on a tiny hidden string of numbers, the exact code Marcus Lane uses for his corporate travel. A fatal error. Her pulse quickens as she pulls up his travel logs from the last 12 months, laying them beside the cash drops. Every single time Marcus boarded a flight to a country with zero extradition laws, that ghost account spiked with heavy withdrawals. Isolated, these numbers look like standard business. Bound together, they equal millions vanishing into thin air. Emma sits back, the brutal reality settling in her bones. This was never an outside attack. It is a rotting inside job. It just goes to show you, unchecked greed will always leave a digital paper trail, leading right back to the rat. Marcus engineered an absolute masterpiece of theft. A machine this perfect requires the highest level of trust. Emma grabs a pen and starts mapping the betrayal, violently color-coding the dates, the vanished cash, and the offshore drops. With every line she draws, the horror crystallizes. Marcus is not just stealing pocket change. He is funding an entire shadow empire right under Nick's nose. In this dark underworld, touching the king's treasury is an absolute death sentence that drags everyone down with it. Emma leans back, staring at the tangled web she just exposed. A wild rush of fury and pure victory washes over her. She has the bulletproof right hand, man dead to rights. Let this be a lesson for the proud. The bigger the ego driving the deception, the harder the final fall when the truth inevitably catches up to you. Moving with cold precision, she prints the damning evidence, stacking the heavy pages into a thick folder. Each step down that echoing marble hallway feels like a countdown. Her heart is hammering against her ribs. Down in the dimly lit library, Nick looks like a ghost, worn thin by the war. But the moment Emma steps through the doors, holding that file like a loaded weapon, his entire posture shifts. The apex predator wakes up. She does not speak a single word. She just drops the folder onto his desk. Nick opens it. The silence stretches as his eyes tear through the pages, his expression hardening into cold stone. When he finally looks up, his eyes are a tragic collision of fierce pride and a terrifying, bottomless dread. Proving once again, the unvarnished truth is always a remarkably heavy burden to hand over to someone you actually care about. Emma holds his gaze, her voice perfectly steady as she drops the hammer. She tells him she found the rat. It is Marcus. Nick goes terrifyingly still. Time simply stops in that shadowy room. Finally, a single mechanical nod breaks his freeze. He tells her she did her job perfectly. But now she needs to walk away and let him handle the bloody fallout. But Emma can feel the pressure dropping. Nick's fingers slowly trace the color-coded charts, looking like a man bleeding out from a blade he never saw coming. The quiet in that room is agonizing, pierced only by the sharp snap of turning pages. Emma stays rooted to the floor, fists clenched tight, waiting for the earth to crack open. Here is the bitter truth. Uncovering a massive betrayal always demands a heavy psychological toll, and burying a broken trust is never a clean job. She braces for the shouting, but Nick is paralyzed by a terrifying calm. Suddenly, he slams the folder shut, sending a silver pen skittering across the floor. The icy, controlled boss is gone. He stares right through her, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper, demanding to know if she is certain. Emma anchors her feet. She tells him every single transaction was verified 3 times over. The encrypted flows perfectly mirror the phantom travel logs. There is absolutely no margin for error. Marcus has been bleeding them dry for 8 months, burying his theft in mundane costs. He truly believed he was untouchable. Stick with me on this one. It is a timeless tragedy. The people who think they are the absolute smartest guys in the room always end up tripping over their own massive arrogance. Now, the reality of Nick's world truly reveals itself. He grabs the file, turning toward the massive bookshelf behind his desk. He pulls a specific spine, and with a heavy mechanical groan, a hidden door slides open, exposing a stairwell. He orders Emma to follow. She hesitates for just a heartbeat before descending. There is no dungeon down here. It is a sprawling high-tech nerve center, humming with live feeds and global maps. Nick marches straight to a battle-scarred veteran named Paul, slapping the file onto his console. His voice is totally devoid of emotion. He gives Paul exactly 30 minutes to tear into the raw system logs and prove Emma's theory right. It is a harsh reality to swallow. Trust is a beautiful concept in civilian life, but in this savage business, strict, cold verification is the only thing that keeps you breathing. Nick is already 3 steps ahead. He demands Marcus's exact coordinates in 10 minutes flat. Paul does not waste a breath on questions. He pulls down his headset and goes to war on his keyboard. Nick slowly turns back to Emma. There is a dark respect in his eyes. The dark respects now. He tells her he thought he was hiring a numbers girl, not a ruthless hunter, willing to drag an empire's secrets into the light. He warns her that she is officially swimming with the sharks. There is no turning back. Emma does not even blink. She tells him she made her choice the night he dragged her into this hell, and now she is staying on her own terms. Right then, Paul spins around. The numbers match perfectly. Marcus is at the West Side office. The lesson here: no matter how deep you bury it, your hidden past will always violently collide with your present. Nick does not flinch at the confirmation. His voice drops into a chilling command. He orders Paul to deploy Alex and Team 6. The instructions are brutal and clear. Marcus does not make it out of that building a free man. They are to snatch him under the radar and drag him to the northern isolation site. No witnesses, just pure, terrifying efficiency. The room erupts into orchestrated chaos, and Emma finally feels the true weight of the underworld. This is a life where one betrayal ends with you vanishing into the earth. Nick looks at her, his mask slipping for a second. He offers her an out, telling her she does not need to witness the coming blood. Emma holds her ground. She refuses to look away. Sometimes, you and I just have to watch the brutal karma play out ourselves. Closing your eyes to a dark reality will never actually keep you safe. Listen closely, because you and I both know how these things go. Nick moves right up to Emma, his eyes locking onto hers with a terrifying promise. He tells her this was never just about Marcus stealing cash. That man put Emma directly in the line of fire, and that crossed a boundary Nick simply cannot forgive. His voice drops quiet, and absolute Marcus is done. Fast forward to the gray hours of dawn. The estate is swallowed in an icy fog, dead silent. It is the kind of suffocating quiet only pure power buys. Nick stands in his office, his face carved from stone. The boss is ready to do the unthinkable. Here is a truth you can carry with you. True loyalty is a rare ghost, but betrayal is a debt that always demands to be paid in blood. But Emma is already awake, holding a warm coffee, staring into the morning fog. When Nick enters looking like the angel of death, she knows the hour has come. He gives her the facts. Marcus is arriving soon, completely blind, thinking it is just a standard meeting about expanding territory. Emma places her mug down, her pulse racing, and insists she stays in the room. Nick shuts it down fast, refusing to let her see the violence he will unleash, but she does not yield. She reminds him she was the one almost ruined by this betrayal. She earned her place in that room. Let that sink in. If you ever try to bury someone in the cold dark, you better be absolutely certain they do not know how to dig their way back to the surface. Emma holds his gaze, demanding her front row seat to the fallout. Nick watches her, his expression darkening into something truly heartbreaking. He steps closer and asks a question that hangs heavy in the room. If she watches what he is about to do, will she ever be able to look at him the same way? He admits he is not afraid of her seeing his true colors, but he warns her that the man waiting for Marcus downstairs has no soul. It is a caged beast he has spent decades holding back, and he refuses to let that shadow touch her. Emma stares at him, finally seeing the crushing weight he carries to keep them safe. But she holds her ground. It brings us to a harsh but true lesson. Sometimes, in life, there are certain fires you simply have to walk straight through if you ever wanted to come out clean. Emma tells him without a tremble in her voice that she is stronger than he realizes. Nick agrees, but he counters with a heavy truth. Just because you have the strength to carry a terrible burden, that does not mean you should have to. He insists on carrying this sin alone. He was the one who brought Marcus in, so he has to be the one to close the book. Outside, the crunch of gravel and a heavy car door slamming breaks the quiet. A dark SUV sits in the driveway. The traitor is here. Nick checks his watch, his face completely blank. He tells Emma to stay put, offering one last look mixed with deep sorrow and cold iron. He will return when the silence is permanent. Here is something we all learn the hard way. The only way to fix a massive mistake is to face the ugly truth head on, no matter the cost. Before he turns away, Nick steps close and cups her cheek. He traces her face like a man, trying to memorize the light, before descending into total darkness. He promises her that nobody will ever breathe a threat in her direction again. Emma is trembling, but she looks this hardened kingpin in the eye and speaks the absolute truth. "Do not end this man over me," she whispers. "Do it because he is a snake, and there is a lesson in that for all of us. Never let pure anger drive your most permanent decisions, or you will lose your own soul in the process." Nick freezes, then nods slowly. He tells her he only acts on principle, and Marcus broke the final rule. He walks out, leaving Emma alone in the hollow silence of the mansion, listening to her own heartbeat while the executioner goes to work. You and I know the aftermath is where the real ghost story begins. The heavy oak door opens without a sound, but the exhausted thud of boots gives him away. Emma feels her stomach drop when Nick steps into the light. He wears a fresh black shirt, but the cuffs are clinging damply to his wrists. He scrubbed his hands fast. There is no blood on him, but his eyes are entirely hollow, like his humanity was left in the basement. Emma stays perfectly quiet. Sometimes, giving someone the grace of silence is the smartest move you can make when they are walking on broken glass. She watches this absolute giant sit heavily across from her. He stares at the empty space between them and whispers two quiet words. It is done. Just two simple words, spoken, without a single trace of emotion, but they hit Emma like a physical blow. She does not ask for the gruesome details. She does not ask what kind of wreckage he left behind in that cold room. She just looks into his hollow eyes and accepts the dark reality. Marcus is gone forever. There are no second chances in this life. It forces her to swallow the bitter pill of the world she has chosen. And listen closely, because this is a heavy truth to carry. The darkest choices we make always come with a weight, and you have to drag that weight forever. Nick sits there rubbing his temples, fighting a silent war in his own mind to justify erasing a man he once trusted. There is no visible mess, but Emma swears she can smell the cold rust of sorrow clinging to his skin. Emma pushes her chair back and walks slowly over to his side. She does not bombard him with panicked questions or try to pull him out of his head. She simply rests her hand gently on his broad shoulder, offering a quiet anchor in his storm. Being a steady, calming presence for someone whose world is spinning is one of the most powerful lessons in true loyalty. Nick slowly looks up at her, and the terrifying mask of the ruthless boss shatters. Right behind his eyes is a desperate, damaged man. He reaches up and grips her hand, pulling her down beside him until they are sharing the exact same breath. He spares her the brutal facts, and she demands nothing. But she feels the violent tremor in his grip. This was not just business. It was the agonizing rupture of a bond that had to end in tragedy. The quiet in the room is suffocating, heavy with unspoken grief, until Nick finally breaks. When he speaks, his voice is raw, stripped down to gravel and pain. He confesses how much he despises leaving her alone, and how deeply he hates that she had to witness the monster he tries so desperately to keep buried. But Emma does not flinch. She rests her palm flat against his chest, right over his racing heart, and offers him salvation. She tells him she did not see a monster today. She saw a man doing whatever it took to keep his promise. Reminding someone of their worth when they are standing at rock bottom is a life lesson you can never forget. Nick stares at her like a drowning man finding the shore. He drops his heavy head against hers, finally releasing a ragged breath he had been trapping inside. She does not pull away from the cold reality. Instead, she squeezes his hand even tighter. In that tiny motion, Nick realizes he has found something incredibly rare. Emma does not need the grim explanations or the brutal logic of his world. She only needs to know the man beside her still honors his word, and that he came back to her. Finding a partner who looks at your darkest parts without trying to fix your soul is a beautiful lesson in love. They sit together as the afternoon bleeds away. The fading light casts melancholic shadows across the stone floor, perfectly matching the exhaustion in their bones. Nick keeps her hand locked in his, not as a possession, but as an absolute lifeline, anchoring them both to the earth after surviving such a bitter storm. I want you to picture the heavy stillness of this moment. Very slowly, Emma leans to the side, resting her head against his tense shoulder. It is a subtle gesture, yet it speaks volumes about her absolute devotion. He remains perfectly still, letting his cheek rest against her hair. The intimacy of it is staggering. She is entirely consumed by this dangerous life, and the locks on the exit doors have been permanently thrown. Eventually, she asks the question that has been haunting the room. Does he ever just get exhausted? Constantly looking over his shoulder, playing judge and executioner. It is a brutal lesson for all of us. The relentless grind of a toxic life will eventually hollow you out. Nick stays quiet for a long time. Then, dropping his kingpin armor, he breathes out a simple, heartbreaking yes. Nick turns his head, his voice heavy, with a bleak reality. He explains that when you wear the crown in the underworld, a single flicker of hesitation will bring the entire empire crashing down on your head. Exhaustion is simply not a luxury he can afford. He confesses that he never asked for the violence this cursed life chose him. When you find yourself standing in the center of a hurricane, you only have two choices. You plant your feet deep into the mud, or you get entirely swept away. That is a survival lesson we all face when the world goes dark. Stepping up and owning your burden is the only way through. Emma sits beside him, utterly speechless. She is overwhelmed by a deep, aching respect for the man. In a world where one wrong breath means a grave, true trust is a treasure bought only with blood. Welcome back to the Midnight Hour. Let's talk about Nick for a minute. He runs a syndicate that would make the devil himself flinch. Yet somehow, a fragile piece of his soul remains intact. He still shields her, even when his methods bleed into pure madness. Emma catches his gaze, asking a question that hangs heavy in the smoke-filled air. Has he ever truly trusted anyone? Just for being good? Nick flashes this bitter, tired smile. He had a friend once, but that friend walked away before the street could claim his life. Sometimes you have to realize that walking away from the fire is the only way to keep from burning. Emma stops pushing. She understands now. That ghost from his past explains why Nick built a fortress around his heart the day she walked in. He finally let her past his walls, and the bridge is burned behind them. Emma admits she used to think the world was neatly split into heroes and villains. But watching this boss move in the shadows taught her something else. The world only spins in bruised shades of gray, And sometimes doing the wrong thing is the only way you stay breathing. Nick stares at her, totally stunned. She tells him she might not bless his violence, but she understands it, and she is done being afraid. Right there, the ice in his eyes shatters. He reaches out, brushing her cheek with a hand that just took a life, whispering he never needed her to approve of his dark side. True acceptance does not mean cheering. For the flaws, it means staying when the lights go out. Nick tells her he just needs her presence, just needs the one person who makes him question all the absolute codes he lived by. Emma whispers back that she will stay, but only if the rules change. No more lies, not a single secret, and he can never push her away again. Listen, drawing a line in the sand and setting firm boundaries is a lesson we all have to learn if we want love to survive. Nick gives a slow, heavy nod, making a silent vow he would rather die than break. He leans in, pressing a soft kiss to her forehead, wrapping her in a warmth she never knew she was starving for. For the first time, Emma is completely anchored in her choice. The underworld is a minefield, but she is ready to trust this ruthless man and finally let herself fall in love. The morning sun spills through the heavy curtains, and Emma walks into the office, looking like someone entirely new. She carries the untouchable calm of a mafia queen. Nick is already awake, nursing his black coffee and watching his crew scrub away the blood from the night before. Without turning around, he asks if she managed to sleep. She says yes, stepping up to slam a massive folder right onto his mahogany desk. She locks eyes with him, demanding full and unrestricted access to every single operation in the syndicate. Grabbing the wheel of your own destiny instead of riding passenger is a lesson that changes everything. Nick slowly turns to face her, his eyes narrowing in shock. He is not saying no, but he is floored that she is jumping into the fire this fast. You and I have to admire a power play like this. Emma tells him straight up that if she is living in this brutal world, the days of plaguing the helpless victim are over. She wants the ugly truth, no softened edges, no hidden agendas. To be his partner, she has to know every filthy detail of the empire. Nick falls dead silent. He sets his coffee down and steps close, searching her eyes for any trace of fear to justify keeping her safe in the dark. But she does not blink. She is ready for the hidden wars and the dirty money. Here is a lesson for you. Sometimes you have to reject safety if you ever want to stand on equal ground. Emma is completely done being the weak link. She is demanding her crown, and it is a beautiful thing to watch. The absolute boss of this criminal machine, a man who has spent 2 decades sleeping with a loaded gun, looks at her and simply drops his armor. He lets out a heavy breath, shedding years of paranoia in a single second. He opens his biometric safe and hands over a heavy titanium case. Inside is the holy grail, an encrypted drive, holding every corrupt politician, hidden account, and buried body tied to his name. He warns her she might hate what she finds, but it is all hers. The lesson hidden in this metal box is simple. Real trust is never about showing someone your best side. It is about handing them the blade that could ruin you and trusting they will never use it. It is a terrifying kind of surrender. He lays everything on the line right there. Nick tells her the secrets are gone, and if she wants to run, no one will stop her. But Emma keeps her hands perfectly still. She takes that case without a single tremble, understanding the massive weight of the sins she is inheriting. She whispers a quiet thank you, and Nick gives her a rare, exhausted smile that melts the coldness from the room. He tells her the absolute truth is not just a pawn in his game anymore. She is the only reason he still wants to keep the empire breathing. When you find that one soul who anchors you in a chaotic world, you hold on to them with everything you have. That is a truth you can carve into stone. The electric pull between these two right now is completely undeniable. The moment her skin meets that cold metal, Emma crosses the point of no return. She is swimming in the darkest waters of the Mafia now, absorbing his deepest sins. Hours later, she is sitting alone in a dimly lit room, a desk lamp casting long shadows over a mountain of files. That metal box sits there like a ticking bomb, holding the literal pulse of the most dangerous man in the city. But she does not panic. Her heart beats with the steady rhythm of a clock striking midnight. Life teaches us that sometimes the ultimate display of power is just staying perfectly calm when the entire world expects you to shatter. She runs her hand over the access card, knowing she is walking into a war zone, and she is entirely ready for the fallout. Picture this scene with me. The heavy door clicks open, and Nick steps inside. No warning, just that towering presence he carries everywhere. But instead of his terrifying mobster aura, he brings a quiet, guarded softness into the room. He walks toward her like he's stepping onto holy ground, careful and exposed. He asks in a low, gravelly voice if she has looked at the files yet. Emma swivels her chair to face him directly, completely unbothered. It reminds you of a critical truth. The strongest people in any room are always the ones who know exactly when to lower their shields. Knowing how to read a moment is a life lesson that can save you, and Nick plays this completely perfectly. Emma holds his gaze, and this is where the dynamic shifts forever. She tells him she is not here to be put on a pedestal and protected. She intends to carry the heavy burdens and pull the triggers right alongside him. Nick freezes, studying her face like a man trying to memorize a fading dream. He sits down, closing the space between them, and delivers a brutal reality check. If his empire burns to ash, she will burn with it. Right and wrong vanish, and it becomes a bloody fight to see tomorrow. But here is the thing, a true partnership means sharing the dirt, not just the sunshine. You cannot claim the glory if you will not bleed in the trenches. Emma does not look away. She simply promises him they will survive it all. The second those words leave her mouth, time just stops in that dimly lit office. It is only the two of them, hearts beating in the quiet dark. Nick reaches out, his fingers tracing her jawline with a tenderness reserved for fragile things. She leans into his palm, and he closes the distance. This is no desperate movie kiss. This is a vow, a silent blood pact between two people who just crossed a line they can never uncross. If you really want the massive rewards in life, you and I both know you have to be left willing to burn the boats behind you. Sometimes, embracing the point of no return is the only way to discover what your soul is actually made of. The old life is gone, and there is no turning back. When the kiss finally breaks, the silence in the room is heavy and thick. Emma rests her forehead against his, giving him a small, genuine smile that could melt the winter outside. She whispers she is not going anywhere. Nick holds her hand like she is a lone flare burning in a pitch-black sky. Outside that door, enemies are waiting in the rain, hungry for his crown. But inside this room, everything is different. She is no longer just a stray girl he felt sorry for. She is his equal. It proves that just a single sliver of light can shatter the dark nights. When you finally find the person willing to stand beside you in the fire, the odds of survival completely change. The brutal king of the city just found his queen. Things take a sharp turn from here. The moment Emma walks into the operations room as his confirmed partner, the air in the estate shifts. Those skeptical stares from the hired guns disappear, replaced by a tense, heavy respect. She is not there to play house. She dives right into the dirty financial ledgers and instantly spots a shadow in the numbers. Using a sharp mind, she uncovers massive cash bleeds hidden as equipment fees for ghost locations. Somebody is stealing from the man they call the devil. Let that be a lesson for anyone listening out there in the dark. Never underestimate the quiet ones. Grab his date. They are always the ones who notice the cracks in the walls before the house comes crashing down. Picture the heavy oak of that boardroom table, the old guard glaring through their cigar smoke as she slides those receipts right down the center. But Nick just gives that slow, heavy nod. The tech guy confirms she is dead right, and the silence in that room gets thick enough to cut. She doesn't stop there. Over the next 2 weeks, she completely guts their broken systems, bringing in heavy encryption and a risk model so sharp it leaves Nick taking notes. You and I have seen people try to talk their way to the top, but let me tell you, hard work beats a fast mouth every single time. If you want real respect in this life, stop arguing. Just put undeniable results on the table. and watch them make room for you. The stakes could not be higher. They are sitting across from an international syndicate. The air cold and tense. The suits across the table try to bury a quiet little clause that would bleed Nick's future dry. But Emma catches the trap. Without missing a beat, she drops a revised contract on the glass, cornering them completely while keeping the crown firmly on Nick's head. It is a beautiful thing to watch. Even Alex, the security chief, who used to look at her like poison, claps her shoulder. He knows she belongs. Later, as the expensive red wine catches the firelight, the real truth settles in. Sometimes the hardest lesson we ever learn is that what you actually do will always build a bigger, heavier legacy than the words you say. Just when the dust begins to settle, she rips right into the southern supply chain, tearing out a massive inside threat by the roots. Later that night, the shadows are long, and she is just resting against Nick by the fading embers. He wraps an arm around her, and that cold, terrifying edge totally drops from his voice. He tells her she did more than he ever thought possible. Emma just smiles softly, her fingers gripping his, and promises she is only just getting started. It is a beautiful thing to witness. Never let anyone, not even yourself, put a lid on what you can pull off. When you find that rare groove, you put your foot down and keep driving. Nick lets out a deep, quiet laugh, kissing the top of her hair. He knows what he has. Nick leans in close, his voice a gravelly whisper against the quiet night. He tells her he does not need to see the rest of her tricks. He just knows he bet on the right heart. Sitting there in the warm glow, they finally look like two broken pieces sliding into place. His empire is suddenly untouchable. Not from fear, but because Emma gave the monster a beating pulse. The sun rises the next morning, pouring gold across the quiet mansion. Nick sips his coffee, just watching her breathe, staring at the greatest plot twist of his entire life. We spend so much time fighting, alone, but true power is not about sitting on a dark throne by yourself. It is about finding that one soul who keeps your blade sharp and guards your back when the wolves come. The air in the room suddenly goes painfully thick, but Nick plays it off like they are just talking about the weather. With a totally straight face, he asks if she is free this weekend to meet his mother. Not as his partner in crime, not as the shadow behind the throne, but just as her. You can literally see the hesitation bleeding into this ruthless man's eyes. A guy who owns cities, suddenly terrified of a weekend trip. He tells her about this little wooden house buried in rural Wisconsin, a quiet place that knows nothing about the blood on his hands. His mom just thinks her boy works long hours. It is a gentle reminder for all of us tonight. No matter how much money or power you stack up, you must never lose sight of where your story started. Emma looks at those tired eyes, and suddenly everything makes sense. Beneath the heavy armor of the boss, Nick is just a son, burning his own soul to protect a tiny patch of heaven for his mother. She tells him yes without a second thought. Come the weekend, they hit the highway just as the dawn breaks. No blacked-out vehicles, no hired guns, just the two of them watching the miles roll by. The quiet in the car feels right. Emma talks about her father pushing financial papers on her as a kid, while Nick remembers fixing an old roof with his mom. When they finally pull up, a beautiful cabin sits, wrapped in an ocean of purple lavender. Emma feels her chest tighten. The best moments in this life are usually the quiet ones we never see coming. His mother is already waiting on the wooden porch. She is a small woman, but her smile holds the warmth of a rising sun. She wraps Nick in that desperate, heavy hug only a mother can give a son she misses. Then she turns her warm eyes to Emma, pulling her right in, making her feel instantly safe. They share a beautiful lunch out under the shade of ancient trees, eating roast meat and listening to the wind. His mom starts laughing, sharing stories about how quiet little Nick used to fight the bullies to protect his younger brother. Emma is smiling until the shadow passes over the table. The mother softly mentions how Nick completely froze up inside after his father passed. It is a hard truth of life. Unhealed wounds will change the very shape of who you are. After the plates are cleared, Nick gently guides his tired mother inside to rest. Emma steps out into the garden by herself, letting her fingers brush against the soft purple lavender. The absolute peace of this place is staggering, a million miles away from the concrete and the blood they deal with every day. And standing right there in the sun, the truth hits her chest like an anvil. She is completely in love with him. Not with the cold king of the underworld, but with the man who treats his mother like glass, the man who quietly stands behind her and lets her be exactly who she is. At the end of the day, the greatest gift you can ever find is someone who loves your true, unfiltered soul, without ever trying to rewrite a single line of your story. Nick steps back out into the light, spots her standing among the flowers, and walks over without making a sound. He stops right next to her, and the back of his hand gently grazes hers. It is such a small movement, but the gravity of it feels massive. Emma turns to face him, and for the very first time, the heavy armor she always wears just falls away. There is no distance, no clever games. She does not even need to speak the words aloud, because the silence carries it all. It is in the soft rise of her chest, the raw look in her eyes, and the way their fingers slowly lock together under the endless afternoon sky. Listen to me tonight. Sometimes the loudest promises are made without a single sound. True connection lives purely in the spaces between words. The sun dips below the hills, and the night rolls in, painting the trees in heavy strokes of silver moonlight. Nick and Emma sit close on an old wooden bench out back. There is no city static, no ringing phones, just the deep rhythm of the crickets. Nick stays dead silent for what feels like hours, his eyes fixed on the dark, dragging up a ghost from the dirt. Emma just waits. She can feel the agonizing weight sitting on his chest. When he finally speaks, his voice is cracked and ruined. He tells her about Daniel, his little brother, a kid with a bright smile who actually believed the world was packed with good people. It breaks your heart, doesn't it? Innocence is such a beautiful light, but in the wrong hands, it is the most fragile thing on earth. You have to stay with me on this one, because the pain gets incredibly deep here. When their father died, their mother fell apart, and Nick learned that protecting your family means walking in the dark, but Daniel refused to see the shadows. When their father's old crew got involved in something rotten, Daniel tried to do the honorable thing and warned the wrong people. 3 days later, they pulled Daniel out of a mangled car. It's a fake crash, designed to silence a good boy. Nick found out the truth when it was already too late. He could not even burn the crew down without putting a target on his grieving mother, so he swallowed the poison and walked away. The agonizing reality of this life is that sometimes doing the right thing will cost you absolutely everything. After putting his brother in the ground, Nick turned his heart to stone. He forced himself to believe that love was nothing but a fatal flaw. He looks at Emma now, his dark eyes shining with an intensity that could shatter glass. He tells her she is not like Daniel. She knows exactly how vicious their reality is, yet she plants her feet and stays. He looks right into her soul and swears that while he cannot promise her peace, he will bleed out before he lets the world take her. Emma simply holds his gaze. She looks right past the violent mob boss and sees the terrified boy still bleeding inside. She sees true, desperate love. The final lesson tonight is simple. Real loyalty is choosing to stand by someone's side, even when their whole world is on fire. Emma finally understands that love is never about grand, cinematic speeches. It is about waking up in the cold light of day and choosing that person. She reaches up, her fingers brushing his cheek. She does not need a flawless world. She just needs the certainty that when everything shatters, his hand will be holding hers. She vows that no matter how dark the road gets, she is not running away. If the shadows try to swallow him, she will pull him back. Nick slowly turns his head, pressing a deeply respectful kiss into her palm. It is an absolute, unspoken promise. In that quiet breath, Emma knows there is no turning back from this life. The truth is, real strength is not about standing perfectly tall, but having someone brave enough to pull you out of the dirt when you fall. And the beautiful part is, she has absolutely no fear. This man beside her, carrying a lifetime of heavy scars and devastating losses, is exactly who she wants in her corner for every upcoming street war and every heartbeat she has left. The scene slowly fades to a long wooden table in a quiet backyard, lit by dozens of flickering candles. The night wind carries the sweet scent of lavender, while a massive full moon watches them begin again. Nick pours the red wine, looking at Emma with a gentle vulnerability the underworld has never witnessed. Wearing a simple dress, she glows with an unshakable peace. Words are barely spoken, yet the connection is electric. Finding true peace with someone is the ultimate victory in this life, far more valuable than any dark empire you could ever build. You and I both know how rare these quiet moments are, in a life drenched in danger. Time basically hits the brakes, allowing them to finally breathe. This is not the end of their story, nor is it a magical reset. It is stepping up to the next level of their path, not because the underworld forced them, but because they chose each other. Nick slowly raises his glass. His eyes lock onto hers, completely unguarded. He thanks her for staying, even after he showed her the ugliest pieces of his soul. Emma simply smiles, tapping her glass against his. She tells him she stayed because he had the courage to look his demons in the eye. The sharp clink of glass rings out into the dark garden. Remember this tonight. Nobody walking this earth is flawless, but confronting your own darkness takes real guts. Under the warm glow of those shivering candle flames, they are just two people sharing a meal. They tell quiet stories, letting the comfortable silence do the talking. There is no need for impossible vows or dramatic blood oaths anymore. The only thing that truly matters is knowing that when they open their eyes tomorrow, they will still be standing side by side. This chaotic saga between Nick and Emma proves one vital truth. Real love does not come from finding a perfect partner. It comes from looking at someone's mess and deciding to heal together. We are all dragging around heavy chains and past trauma. The profound lesson here? If you can find someone who stays patient and genuine with you, love can survive absolutely anything. A steady connection will always anchor your soul through the violent storms. So now, they are staring down a massive rebuild. We are not just talking about clawing back his underworld empire. They are building a genuine home, a foundation of deep trust, and a safe harbor. They both know the road ahead will be brutal and filled with danger. But the ultimate difference is that they never have to fight these wars alone again. So, my late-night listeners, what do you make of this wild ride with Nick and Emma? Have you ever been in a spot where your heart screams for one thing, but your logic fights back with everything it has? Does their story remind you of an impossible choice you had to make? Drop your thoughts down in the comments below, because the most meaningful thing we can do in this life is to share our struggles and learn from each other when the night gets dark.
Nicholas Carver's actions create a complicated but important lesson about protection, strategy, and emotional responsibility. He throws Emma out into the storm, not because she failed, but because he wants the traitor to believe she has been rejected and is no longer valuable. From a strategic point of view, his plan has logic. He places security around her, arranges surveillance, and tries to use her dismissal as a diversion. However, the story makes clear that even a protective plan can still cause deep harm when it removes honesty and consent. Emma is not told the truth. She is made to feel worthless, humiliated, and abandoned. She walks into the rain, believing her career and her mother's future are collapsing. When she later learns that she was used as a bait, her anger is justified. This teaches an important educational lesson. Good intentions do not automatically excuse harmful methods. In leadership, parenting, friendship, or romantic relationships, people sometimes hide the truth for someone's own good, but secrecy can damage trust, and even when the truth believe that they are protecting someone. Nick learns that strategy cannot replace respect. Emma needed protection, but she also deserved honesty. She deserved to understand the danger surrounding her own life. The story encourages viewers to ask a mature question. Are we protecting someone, or are we controlling them because it is easier for us? True protection should include communication whenever possible. It should preserve the person's dignity rather than sacrifice it for convenience. Nick's apology becomes meaningful because he admits he was wrong and stops defending his choice as perfect. The lesson is clear. If you care about someone, do not only keep them alive, protect their trust, their dignity, and their right to know the truth.